everybody. Welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and your host. Boy, it's been an incredible month of September. I mean, we're rounding out here with Tanner Harris of Blue Nose Aerial. We've focused on movers and shakers all month, and man, what a great way to end this month with Tanner, and I can't wait to talk to him. But, just to kind of do a quick recap, if you missed any of this, go back and watch the videos on demand, right? So we kicked off the month with our sponsor, Parazero and Delta Drone International. It was absolutely incredible. We had Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition. We had True Weather and Drone Industry Systems Corporation. And of course, we had Influential Drones and the FAA on during National Drone Safety Awareness Week. So again, what an incredible month. And I'm so honored to have Tanner with us. Tanner, first of all, is based in Colorado, which is also my home right now. And he's also a military veteran and just doing incredible things. So welcome, Tanner, to the podcast.
Thanks, Don. It's so great to join you again. I'm excited for the podcast. You're doing great things, and you're a thought leader across the industry. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, absolutely. And for those that we right now we're not recording our clubhouses. Tanner was on a clubhouse with us for UAS Colorado back in July. That's when I first really got to hear a little bit about his drone franchise model. It just completely blew my mind. And then he was just on last Thursday with us in our Drone Law Connections room. And, so we're going to just expand on that conversation, Tanner, and maybe catch some people up that aren't aware of what you've been doing. But before we jump into Blue Nose, let's talk a little bit about your background. So tell us about that first.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I started in manned aviation. I'm a pilot. I studied that in college at Middle Tennessee State. My folks were actually Army helicopter pilots. That's where they met, was in Fort Rucker, actually, when they were going flight training with the Army. My brother's an Air Force pilot as well, so he's up in Montana flying helicopters. Uncle was. I mean, that's just like what we did was military aviation. So that's what I grew up around and went to school to study that. Joined the Navy after that. So a couple of years later, I joined the Navy. I flew to E6 for them in Oklahoma City at Tinker Air Force Base for a while, and wrapped up my time on the USS George Washington in Norfolk, Virginia. And then we moved out here to Colorado a few years ago, and that's when I started flying for an airline out here. And we've been loving it ever since. My wife is a physician assistant at the University of Colorado Children's Hospital out here, so she's just doing incredible stuff. We got two young kiddos who are just now recently getting back into school in the last few weeks, so it's good. We're loving Colorado a lot. We're learning a bunch about the drone industry, so it's been a wild ride the last couple of years.
Well, like you, I'm obviously a huge fan of Colorado, having moved, kind of emigrated, lack of a better term here myself. And I think what they say about Colorado is the air is rare, but the flying's good. And so let's talk about Blue Nose Aerial because, Tanner, if I recall correctly, you started this company right when COVID hit pretty hard around March of 2020. So tell us why you started it, what your inspiration was, and then how it's starting to evolve.
Yes. So the idea kind of started when we were stationed at Tinker in Oklahoma City, and this was probably 2014, 2015 timeframe. And, drones were just then kind of recently becoming commercially available, right? You could go buy them. They were somewhat affordable. The technology was evolving. Cameras were being attached. So I was kind of collaborating a bit with my dad, and he was like, man, we could do this, right? Like you could set up a camera on a drone and go fly over top of people's roofs, right? After like a hailstorm or a tornado came through, specifically in Oklahoma being Tornado Alley, right? It was kind of like a real viable business idea at that point. But then, life got in the way. We had two kiddos. We were reassigned twice. We, changed careers around. So we never really did anything with it up until about 2019. And then at that point, I was gone. I had already kind of gone through my probationary year with the airline, so I had a little bit of extra time, and I felt pretty comfortable with the aircraft that I was flying. But I had, kind of the middle of the week, I wasn't really doing a whole lot. Junior airline pilots end up flying a lot on the weekends, so that's kind of when I said, you know what, let's do this drone business. Let's give it a whirl. Might as well, see what happens with it, and it'll be a good, if nothing else, a good use of time, and I'll learn a bunch, right? If everything else fails, I'll at least have, kind of gain some new skill sets, hopefully. So that's where it started in 2019. And we launched the website in the kind of the tail end of February, early March of 2020. Uh, Nothing bad was about to happen, right? So that COVID set in just like a week later, and when we actually launched the site, it was really kind of fascinating because it took us in a totally different direction at that point. The several colleagues of mine that I'd either flown with in the Navy or at the airline that I work for had reached out and then said, how do we set up our own drone business? What do we do? Help us out, kind of thing. And I was still so early on. I was like, man, heck if I know, but give me some time and I'll figure it out. I'll come up with an answer. So that's what led us into franchising. And the more that I researched the drone services space in particular within this new booming industry, it became pretty apparent to me that there was a real need for standardization and training and professionalism. And that's where, gosh, in my background as a pilot for the military and the airlines, that's all we do all day, right? That's second nature to us. It's SOPs, it's checklists, right? It's creating a safety culture. It's all of this stuff that we inherently operate by. So in my mind, that's a pretty simple transition that we can apply into the drone services space because there's so many commonalities there, and I think there's a real need for it. So when you combine that with a franchise business model, I think you're checking all the boxes, right? Because now we can focus on that type of standardized operation. We can focus on, hey, what are we doing in Seattle? It's the same thing that we're doing in Miami, and New York, and Los Angeles, right? So if we can do that, and I think we're well on our way, and we're assembling not only a fantastic group of franchise owners, but also just an incredible team of subject matter experts and GIS and photography and business development. We're putting this whole thing together to really kind of solve a lot of those problems for would-be entrepreneurs who might be a little bit hesitant to kind of start their own business. So that's the whole concept. That's where it started. That's kind of where it's evolving into. We're in about let's see, we've got about 27 franchise owners right now, and we're working all over the country.
Yeah, I want to kind of back up a little bit. I mean, there's a lot there. I want to kind of peel it back. First of all, let's start with the name, right? Because Blue Nose Aerial Imaging is an interesting name. It's a term of art in the Navy. So tell us how you came up with that, what that means.
Yeah, I mean, people will probably think of like Blue Nose, like what a weird name for a business, and that's part of the reason that we did it, right? We wanted something that's going to kind of stick in your mind for a little bit, and but for just like you mentioned, Blue Nose in the Navy refers to probably what was best known as like an order, right? Like a maritime order. So there's these customs and traditions that are typically celebrated within the Navy, and more generally just kind of the nautical services. And for example, some folks might be familiar with being a shellback, right? So when you cross the equator for the first time, you are inducted as a shellback. There's a whole initiation ceremony. So likewise, on the flip side of it, when you cross into the Arctic Circle for the first time, you're inducted as a Blue Nose. So in our mind, it was a great name because one, it was a little bit odd, right? So people are going to hopefully remember it. And for us, that's a big deal, right? Brand development and recognition is huge for a franchise. But two, it's also a nod to our military service, and many of our franchise owners are also veterans. Some of them are still active duty, actually. So I think it checked a lot of boxes for us because of the fact that it was unique. It was a nod to the military, and it also kind of represents, really following through. Having the ability to press in light of some pretty challenging circumstances and still achieve, right, and still striving for that excellence. So for us, that's where Blue Nose came from, and we're sticking with it. It's been good so far.
Well, and it's so apropos on so many levels, especially because you really did launch it fully in COVID. There were so many challenges that you had to overcome. So just to kind of back up a little bit, you said that you had this idea, you started the company, but initially maybe it wasn't going to be a franchise model, and then all these folks are calling you, your fellow military veterans and pilots, and saying, hey, we want to set up our own company. How do we do that? And that's when you decided, hey, franchise could be the way to do it. Let me ask you this, Tanner. Somebody brought to my attention that Measure tried to launch a franchise effort like in 2017. They obviously went in a different direction, now just focused on software. But to your knowledge, is anybody else out there doing this franchise model that you've now launched?
No. I think we're to the best that I can tell, we're the only franchise drone services provider in the U.S. And I think there's a couple different things about that that are really advantageous for us, obviously, and that's why we chose that model. But I think it's also kind of correcting some deficiencies in the UAS service space, if you will. So, can't speak for Measure, right? I mean, who knows what's going on their end and what drove them to focus more on software. It sounds like they've been pretty successful so far, so that's good for them. But what I think you see in the drone services space right now is a number of kind of drone aggregate companies, right? And it's a great way to expand really quickly. And you can post a website and you can have, a board for all these different projects that you can then bid on potentially. So you can really kind of develop a national presence very quickly. But I think the limitation in that is that there's no way to really enforce standardization, right? There's no team mentality. There's no real training that's involved. And you're kind of, you're just kind of sitting there. It's very passive. So if you bid $100 on a job and then I bid 75, I'm going to get the job, right? But what that looks like in the end of the day is you've got a lot of unhappy pilots because, hey, I only got $75 for my work. And then you've also got a lot of unhappy clients too, right? Because like, well, this was, who knows who this person was? They showed up late or something like that. There's really no customer service piece involved in a model like that. And we've heard from a number of different clients, a number of different pilots who have expressed this frustration to us. So, for us, a franchise business model solves all of that, right? We can interface on a national level with nationwide clients that we can focus with and build their training and credentialing requirements and everything that they need for us to do their job correctly and on time. We can build that into some of our training modules as well. And at the same time, now we've also got a nationwide group of pilots who are entrepreneurs who've got a greater amount of skin in the game, right? They're focused, they're ambitious, they're trying to have develop a really successful business in their own right. So there is that type of team mentality that comes from this. And because if one of us fails, we all fail, right? So there is this whole collective mindset where we need to just be knocking it out of the park every day with clients in a number of different verticals, right? So I think that's kind of what you see if you kind of take a 30,000 foot view of the drone services space right now. Or at least that's what I like to tell myself, I guess. So that's what I think.
And what I say, Tanner, and Jason Sansucci, he's on here, and do drones, and he made some very kind comments about this podcast. Of course, Jason, has his own podcast. He works with you, Tanner. What I said to him on LinkedIn, and I'll just say it here, is to use a Navy term, the rising tide raises all ships. And I just think there's so many interesting and different service models. In fact, last month in Inside Unmanned Systems magazine on a critical infrastructure piece, I kind of outlined all these different ways drones are plugging into that particular sector and outlined, I don't know, 8, I forget how many different models. I didn't really focus on, I didn't know fully about yours at the time. But some of these others you're talking about, we had Paul Hewish on here from Drone Hive. I mean, all these people, they add something, right? And I think we all bring something different to the table. Yours is unique. So let's talk about the aspect of what someone gets when they buy a franchise, right? So I'm going to purchase a drone Blue Nose franchise, let's just say for Colorado Springs where I am. What do I get for that?
The whole concept, right, is to create this turnkey solution, right? And any successful franchise, it should be based upon, a successful model that's proven, and then it's also easily replicatable. So that's really kind of the core concept and what we're trying to provide. So if they're coming on board, it's business development support, it's certification, it's training assistance, right? And not just assistance, it's training you from really A to Z, right? You could come on board and having never flown a drone, not knowing anything about photography or videography fundamentals, least of which, knowing anything about geographic information systems or remote sensing. And we're going to run you through the entire gamut, right? And that's all embedded within our Blue Nose Academy that I know, we've spoken about in the past as well. So, it starts with that, and that's all before we launch it, right? So there's certification, there's business development, there's legal assistance, and we can put you in touch with CPAs as well, right? I mean, do the whole thing, right? Make sure that their business is being run legally, effectively, and we're doing it the right way. Then we get them trained.
So this is working. I mean, right? So by last count, you're up to what, 27
27 now, yeah.
franchises across 18? Now, how many states?
Yeah, I think about 18 or so, yeah. Or I mean, we're registered, we're legal to operate in gosh, I think about 44 of them. We're obviously not quite there yet. We've only been doing this for about 13 months. But yeah, in the last 13 months, we brought on 27 franchise owners.
And your franchisees, once they sign up and they get, I don't know if you mentioned this just now, Tanner, but I think you call it, what do you call it? Something in a box?
Yeah, our business in a box.
Okay, business in a, okay, sorry. I
Yeah.
knew it was something in a box in a box. No, business in a box. And it's everything, as you mentioned, I think, checklists and how to get started. You literally give people drones too, right? To start out, you give them the
Absolutely.
equipment, the hardware.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, so like we said earlier, this all started in the middle of COVID, right? So it was all based off of virtual interaction, right? So and we're trying to keep costs to a bare minimum so that we can hopefully provide, some diversity and income for folks so that they can have some control over their livelihood, especially if they're coming from an airline background where maybe the airlines just kind of came to a screeching halt because of COVID, right? So that's really kind of the impetus, and then that's what got us into that mentality, keeping it very, very low cost. This is probably the most affordable franchise that you'll ever come across, truly, from what I can tell. And then we want to make that turnkey solution literally, in a box, right? Business in a box. So it's got our manuals, it's got your, apparel, it's got the drone, it's got, just kind of the tangible things that you would need to kind of launch your business. And then we conduct all the training and certification and collaboration virtually. So yeah, the drone is included. We're constantly looking at alternatives to that because of the fact that this technology these days is just becoming obsolete so quickly. So we're already looking ahead to what we're going to include in the 2022 box. But that's the whole thing. So within those the manuals that I mentioned, it's not only our franchise operations manual, which is critical to how we conduct business, but also a training manual, an SMS manual, a UAS general operations manual. So those are our four governing documents that are there for franchisees to look back and refer to, and really kind of guide them on how we should safely and legally conduct our business. So I think that in of itself is a huge step from almost every other Jason refers to these guys as like chucks in a truck out there, right? So it's like there is this type of standardized documentation there that this is a bedrock of our operating platform. So that's included. That's also embedded within our Blue Nose Academy as well. So that box literally shows up on their door. It's become a bit of a shtick for us, right? It's like, here's our business in a box. There's obviously a lot more to it than that, but we try to simplify it. Here's exactly what you need, and then we're just growing together.
Yeah. So once they get well, first of all, I want to say I jokingly referred to you as the Starbucks of drone franchise, of drones, because when you think about franchises, it doesn't matter what Starbucks you walked into. Your pumpkin spice latte, since we're now coming into October and they're selling them again, it's one of my favorites. Your PSL should be the same no matter what store that you go to. In your instance, from an operational standpoint, that should be the same. And we are going to talk about your Blue Nose Academy here in a second. But what I want to talk about is kind of the flexibility in your model that allows people to get into verticals, if you will, or market sectors that are relevant to their local area. So let's tap into that a little bit and talk about the kind of the key kind of use cases, if you will, sectors that your franchisees are supporting, just in general. And then I do, of course, I'm going to deep dive into the cannabis and hemp precision ag because it's so interesting. So tell us about kind of that broad overview of the different sectors your folks are jumping into.
The entire goal of when we started this was to create a very affordable, very flexible franchise, right? And there was a number of different reasons for that, and primarily that a lot of the people that we were targeting as prospective franchise owners were facing potential job loss, because this was July, August of 2020, right, in the depths of COVID. So there was no reason for us to, one, I don't think we could justify it as a startup, right? We're not going to have a $100,000 franchise fee. That just doesn't make any sense. And two, it would kind of be counterintuitive to our goal. Our objective is to achieve national coverage quickly with standardization, right? So when we say, hey, this is going to be a six-figure franchise fee, that doesn't make any sense. That defeats our goal. So keep it affordable, and then on the back end, keep it very flexible for people, right? Because we've all got obligations, right? We've got families, we've got careers, you know, who knows what. There's just a lot going on. So this shouldn't be a burden, right? We don't ever want this to be a burden for people, but we do want to provide that level of support where they can be successful and profitable as a business owner as quickly as they possibly can. So the flexibility piece, kind of what you're getting into, is a big component of it, because you know why I think most people are probably familiar with drone service companies in the residential real estate space, right? That's probably the most familiar or commonplace, but it's also, you know, fairly non-technical, right? It's kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. There's a lot more that you can do with remote sensing technology and automated systems. I mean, there's just a whole lot more. So while you might start there, I think you'll quickly find that, you know, that might not be a very sustainable, you know, business model. So we want to make sure that our franchise owners are exposed to a number of different verticals. So getting back to what you're talking about, that could mean a number of different things. For us, we primarily focus on, you know, two different verticals: the construction vertical and the agriculture vertical. And then within them, kind of subsets within, right? So if I'm a franchise owner in Los Angeles, agriculture might not make any sense, right? Like it maybe, but it could be a bit of a drive for me to get to that client, right? So that's probably not where I'm going to put most of my eggs at. Likewise, if I'm in Iowa or like the middle of a farm field somewhere in maybe eastern Colorado or Oklahoma, you know, construction may or may not be a player in that area. So it's kind of up to them. We want to make sure that they've got the tools at their disposal and the market research available already ahead of time, so that, you know, it's over to them to make those decisions. We want to make sure that they've got that toolkit developed. So that looks, you know, for us, that means a lot of strategic partnerships in place, so we can utilize their specific software dashboards, potentially different equipment as well, or different sensors that they might need, and depending on the vertical that they're working within. So, you know, that comes down, like I said, agriculture and construction. And I think within construction, it's a lot of more like commercial real estate assessments, roof inspections, things like that, kind of subsets within that. And then within agriculture, you know, traditional precision agriculture has been around for decades, right? And we're utilizing satellite imagery and, you know, partnering with agronomists in a number of different fields. And, you know, they're able to kind of gather those insights and analyze that data. Drones are revolutionizing that because it's much more affordable. There's better resolution. It's on demand, you know, and that's really where drones are becoming, you know, kind of a staple and very sticky within the agriculture vertical. So,
but even within that, Tanner, like you've kind of created some interesting niches that make a lot of sense, but maybe not a lot of people are really locked onto. You know, your golf course management that falls under this precision ag is one example. And then, of course, you know, like I said, I promise that I'm going to go there. You know, the cannabis and hemp one is really interesting, right? Like, so not every state, you can't do this obviously in every state. Obviously in Colorado you can. But what is unique about the cannabis, like what drones bring to the table, if you will, when it comes to cannabis and hemp agricultural applications?
you know, that's in large part, drones can provide this basically the same information and data collection abilities as you would be if you're growing wheat or, you know, corn or soy, whatever it might be, right? So that traditional precision agriculture is available and alive and ready for the cannabis and hemp space as well. Now, we're obviously talking about much smaller scale typically, right? And this is an emerging market as well, right? So you just mentioned it's not going to be applicable in every state. But the same basic science is there, right? When we're looking at plant health and we're identifying, you know, hey, this is the optimal time to harvest. This is an idea, you know, in terms of yield estimates, right? Hey, this is what we can expect when we go to market. We can also identify disease and pests and, you know, potentially water or nutrient deficiencies. All of that is applicable across all of these different subsets, right? Within cannabis and hemp, primarily cannabis, right? Because if we're talking about consumable cannabis products, this is where this would come into play. So what I came to realize, you know, as you mentioned, you know, niches, right? There's a close family friend of ours, you know, I was talking with who's been pretty successful in entrepreneurship, right? And I kind of told him about this idea of a franchise drone business model. He's like, well, That's all well and good. You can potentially have clients in a number of different verticals, but there's riches and niches, right? You got to be able to specialize in a handful of things and do it better than anybody else. So for me, what that looked like when I started, looking back in Colorado, I'm like, okay, well, what can we do in Colorado that maybe we can really set ourselves apart and kind of develop a name and really some pretty specific knowledge. And cannabis became kind of a player, right? So if I can, when we look at that, it's like it's a booming industry here in Colorado, and then we can potentially pair that with disruptive drone technology as well. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So then it became, I don't know anything about cannabis. What do we do? You coming from a military and an aviation background?
Yeah, I know. I was just, it's just so funny that here you, a Navy guy, and me, an airman, we're talking about using drones for pot. But you know what? There's, look, I'm not going to talk about the value of that because, for some people medically, it's helping some people. So the recreational stuff aside, but there's an interesting thing that you can do with the drones vis-a-vis kind of the plants specifically. What I guess something about male plants versus female plants.
This is yeah. So what I was kind of alluding to within the cannabis space is that I think best business practice is to always approach a client saying, what kind of problems can I solve for you? Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I've got this technology and this equipment and this business model that I think can help out. So when I was going through that research and trying to figure out, what are cannabis cultivators faced with on a day-to-day basis, ultimately it came down to a couple different things, but one of them is the identification of male plants, specifically within consumable cannabis. When it gets into the hemp side of things, not so much a concern, right? Because it's going to be a lot of, it's textile, it's manufacturing, it's going to be processed regardless. So, but when you're talking about the consumable side of things, the male plant presence within a field could be potentially a disaster, right? Because if they're allowed to grow to a certain point within their growth cycle, they can cross-pollinate with female plants, and that's not good, right? Because now these female plants are now seeded truly, and that becomes, it destroys the yields. I mean, on average, I think the numbers that I saw were like 40 to 50% reduction in yield at the end of the day, which is horrible, right? Like you've worked all season long to go to market with this, and now you're getting almost half of what you expected, right? So that's a real problem. When you're also looking at it from a processing standpoint, that's going to be tremendously tedious, right? So now you're kind of de-seeding all of this, right? So I'm not a cannabis pro, but I did stay at a Howard Johnson last night for a holiday Inn, excuse me. But so this is what I kind of came to realize is that the identification of male plants is a big deal within that space. Historically, it's been done through manual labor, and just like we're familiar with drone technology, anything that's labor intensive or potentially dangerous or very time consuming, there's probably an application for drones in there somewhere. So I think there is a body of research that has been kind of in development for the last couple of years, and kind of identifying whether or not drones can pick out these male plants in the field quickly and reliably. And that's through, at least right now, because we're not able to tell really if there's any type of spectral differences, but we could tell using maybe artificial intelligence and the algorithms and computer vision, machine learning, if there's some type of anomaly in that field, right? And this is being done in a lot of different spaces, but it's just kind of in its infancy within male plant identification within cannabis. So one of our partners is based out of Canada, and that's actually what they're doing. They've received grants from the Canadian government to study whether or not drones can do this reliably and accurately. So if I've got a 50-acre field or something like that, instead of just walking up and down it and manually inspecting every single plant, hopefully we can get to the point where drones can fly overhead on demand. We can do this accurately and we can do it reliably. So, that's one of the interesting use cases that are out there right now. But it's still kind of, I think, TBD at this point whether or not that's going to be operationally feasible and if it makes sense for these cultivators. When you think of how much emphasis is placed on their harvest, if they're going to be out there ground truthing no matter what, right? Like that's the thing. So that's kind of one of the niches that we were focused on and we're starting to develop.
And I remember you and I talked about this before. For that size, that small size of a farm, it could take someone walking that farm by hand about 4 to 5 days, whereas for a drone, that could be 4 to 5 hours. I mean, that kind of efficiency, and I know I see that Jason in the chat mentions here repeatable quantitative agronomic statistics, yield counts, canopy area, health, etc., for a very high value crop. This normalize operations in many ways, and totally agree. So that, I love what you said. There's what did you say? There's something in niches.
There's riches and niches.
There's riches and niches. Okay, I mean, I said fox in a box. We are like this episode is brought to you by Dr. Zeus. I love it. I love it. This is great. I want to pivot to safety for a second, talk about culture. Because of course, this month was not only movers and shakers, as we talked about, it was, Drone Safety Awareness Month for the FAA. Our month sponsors, especially ParaZero, are leaders in the safety space with their, autonomous parachute system that's just making a difference globally. Delta Drone is doing a lot of, kind of drone services, a little bit different niches. Riches and niches, and in their case it's mining. Really interesting, they got into this mining space in South Africa and Australia. But across the board, safety is an issue, and I know, like you mentioned, Tanner, coming from the manned aviation space, that this safety culture is so important. It's so critical to standardize and regularize operational procedures and training. So let's talk about Blue Nose Aerial Academy, which you launched to do that for your franchisees. Tell us a little bit about that.
You're totally right. I mean, safety is critical, right? I mean, when it comes to operations and three-dimensional space and time, and when we got people's lives in the balance, potentially even in the unmanned unmanned side of things, it's really very important that we're doing that the right way. The group of folks that we've got on board Blue Nose are just rock stars, right? And so many of them are coming from the manned aviation space, where SMS and that type of recurrent training and initial training is just what they've been doing for their entire lives, right? Like this is critical to how we operate safely. And maybe I meet you in the airport here in Denver, and we're going to fly over to Des Moines or something like that, but I just met you for the first time. But I need to know that you're going to be doing the right things at the right time and saying the right things. No matter what, right? And that's going to conduct, that's going to be able to provide that kind of foundation for safe operations. The same thing applies in the unmanned side of things, right? That's critically important. I think it's really lacking in the industry so far because it's so new, right? The industry is emerging still, and there's a couple of different folks, like you mentioned, who are really thought leaders in that space. But for us, we want to make sure that our franchise owners, hey, this is it. Right out of the gate, we're focused on training, we're focused on safe operations. So that's why we have an SMS manual. All of those manuals that I mentioned earlier are in our Blue Nose Academy.
And Tanner, just real quick, you and we live in a world of acronyms, and that's where we grew up. But I'm sure almost all of the people that are watching this know what SMS is, Safety Management System. But I can tell you, my mom is a super fan, and she wouldn't know what that is. So I'll go back and say SMS is Safety Management System, and it's really a holistic end-to-end program, everything from your policies and then how you kind of debrief after an operation to, do you conduct regularized audits? I mean, that's really what SMS is all about. Major General retired Fred Rogero was on my Legacy podcast, The Dawn of Drones, talking about this. He was the Air Force's chief of safety before he retired. So it's something that I'm familiar with, and you're right, Tanner, so important to have that kind of SMS system and all the training and the manuals that you just mentioned. And even GIS, right? Like, so I know Jason is part of your expert. I looked on your website this morning. You've got a small cadre of subject matter experts that have contributed to this body of knowledge, but it's dynamic body of knowledge, isn't that right? Like, can't you so this is like my life. I hear my dog like scratching himself over here. So if you hear jingling, it's not Santa Claus, it's his collar. And there he goes again. So anyway, so your actual franchisees can contribute to this body of knowledge as well, right? With lessons learned and best practices. So it's
Oh,
almost
for sure.
like, yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is a big part of what we're doing, right? Because I mean, we're still a startup, right? We've been doing this for 13 months. There's still a lot to learn, and especially when we start getting into these more specialized fields, you know, that we want to make sure, hey, if our guys in Pensacola are doing, you know, cell phone tower inspections, some of our other folks throughout the network might not have done that before. So we want to make sure that, you know, we're getting these after action reports and understanding, you know, hey, this is what went well, this didn't go well. So there's a lot of collaboration on a daily basis. That's primarily handled, you know, kind of internal communications, but within the Blue Nose Academy, kind of getting back to the SMS piece and the training side of it, you know, much of what we're doing is it's not rocket science, but it can be very time consuming. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the drone space who are trying to get involved and learn about it. I think there's, you know, I speak to people all the time about some of the frustrations that they're dealing with and reaching clients and how do I do this? And it's going to cost me, you know, an arm and a leg to buy this drone in order to do this the right way from what I can tell. So there's a lot of research that's involved in setting up your own drone business. And we want to make sure that that learning curve is flattened right out the gate. So that's why the training piece and the manuals that I mentioned are so critically important for us. And we've embedded that within our new Blue Nose Academy that we just launched here about a month and a half ago. So we came to realize that doing like a Zoom call or Google Meets, that's one way to do it, right? And we can conduct that in live training, I should say, in person. But it's challenging, especially when we're talking about a national network and different time zones. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an online learning management system available for people to not only go through during their onboarding initially, but also refer back to in the operational space going forward. So that's where it starts with photography fundamentals and, you know, videography and geographic information systems. And, you know, that's where Jason really comes into play on that one. He is our drone doctor. You know, what do you say? Quantitative agronomic statistics. I mean, that's a lot of big words for me, but that's why we get Jason on board.
That's a mouthful for sure.
Yeah, he could do all that stuff. But you know, the other thing that we came to realize is that many of our franchise partners were operators, right? Like they've been flying aircraft for decades, but they might not have any real background in sales and marketing or business development. And that's what we kind of came to realize. It was kind of becoming a kind of a gap in our operations. So we've recently brought on board our business development director just a few months ago, who's now able to not only work with us kind of at Blue Nose HQ here in Denver, developing national clients and forming strategic partnerships, but also he's there to work with our franchise owners on a one-on-one basis to develop their own local business should they choose to, right? And because that's, to be honest, like many of them just didn't have that background. They didn't understand, you know, they just didn't know, how do we do this? How do we focus on lead generation and revenue targeting and a go-to-market campaign? What do we have to do for that? So Mike's there to provide that type of assistance and ongoing support for our franchises. So a number of different things. You know, we've got this cadre of our instructors, and you know, they're all on our advisory committee to say, hey, you know, if what we're focused on is photography today, this is how we compose a solid photograph, right? And we're talking rule of thirds and exposure and just kind of photography fundamentals. Likewise, we've got videography support as well. You know, I know Nick Johnson was on our Clubhouse call last week, and he's just been tremendous. I mean, so he is very, very skilled in editing and videography. And so all of our Blue Nose franchisees can kind of toss their footage over to him, and he can work his magic, and then we're good to go, right? So that type of support from a basic, you know, photography and videography standpoint is really critical. As it gets into the more technical stuff, that's where Jason comes in with the GIS and remote sensing. And as we talk about, you know, business development and going forward, that's where Mike can come in and help out from, you know, that type of standpoint. So we embed all of that within our Blue Nose Academy. It's critically important that we're all working on the same sheet of music and that we're standardizing our operations. So that's how we're doing that.
And I know, you know, a big part of what you do is build a team, as you said earlier, and we only have a couple more minutes left. I really want to, before, I would be remiss not to mention something that I think is so amazing that you have on your website and that you've baked right into your business, which is your values statement, basically. You know, so you and I talked about this before, Tanner. You know, many companies don't even have a mission statement. If they do, most of them don't have a vision statement. And I'd say even fewer have values, especially very prominently on their website. Can you tell us what your 3 values are? Because I absolutely love them. And I think it's so cool that you did that.
For us, and this kind of goes back to our experience within the military. I don't know of any squadron in the Navy where you walk through and you don't see core values or a mission statement on the wall.
Absolutely.
That is always there. And so for
Yep.
us, that became prominent, and we wanted to make sure that we were developing some pillars of how we're going to conduct the operation going forward. So right out of the get-go, that's embedded within our website, just like you mentioned, but every one of our manuals as well, right? So that is there. Our mission is to become the premier full spectrum drone services provider, but our core values are build together, take care of each other, and servant leadership. And for many of us, I think servant leadership really resonates pretty deeply if we're coming from some type of public service background like the military. But to get back to building together, we're a startup, right? This is all self-funded and we're growing organically. So what we're looking for is team members to come on board who are going to chase down opportunities, who are going to think outside the box, who are going to be willing to work together, because I think that's that shared commonality. And when we can go through those iterations together, we form that bond, and we're able to share clients and ideas and equipment, and we do that internally within Blue Nose, right? So if somebody needs a multispectral sensor in Kansas City, we're going to make it happen, right? So that's a big part of it, and at the end of the day, we need wolves on board, right? Like we need people who are ready to commit, and they're ambitious and motivated, ready to do this. The take care of each other, our second core value, that really was that came about because of COVID, right? And so much of what we're trying to do is create opportunities for people to become entrepreneurs affordably, flexibly, but at the end of the day, it's about taking care of the people that matter the most, right? And it's not necessarily, hey, all I want to do is just work for the man and grind my days to the end, and then I retire at 65 as an airline pilot, and then I'm dead by 70. That sucks, right? Like that's not at all what you want to do. So if we can provide those opportunities for folks and enable them to have some control over their financial freedom and be able to take care of their loved ones in whatever capacity that means, we want to do it, right? And that became readily apparent in COVID, right? So I think there's a lot of us who look back on those months, and we're still kind of navigating our way out of it, but there were some silver linings behind COVID, I think, and I think that rebalance in priorities is a big part of it, and that's where taking care of each other was a big deal for us. So that's 1 and 2. Servant leadership is our last one, and that's like I mentioned, that's for us, in my mind, that goes far beyond just the transactional relationship of profit and loss, right? It's like, if you're my client, okay, here's your data, we've analyzed it, we've captured it, but I want to do something more for you. I want to partner with organizations and community associations and really get back in a number of different ways, because that's what we should be doing, right? It's the right thing. And I think so many of us have come to kind of steer away from this corporate mentality where it's like it's the bottom line. It's always the bottom line. Like that's the only thing that ever matters. And that's not what we're trying to do here. That is not it. That's not it at all. So servant leadership is a big deal for us, and we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
Well, you are doing it the right way, and there's really no better way to end this episode than on that. And maybe, Tanner, just to very quickly tell folks how they can reach you, because my guess is the viewers we have are gonna want to reach you. So what's the best way they can do that?
I sure hope so. We're always looking to meet new folks and develop relationships, and obviously, franchise owners, we need them, right? So we need that type of coverage. So our website is bluenoseaerial.com, all one word. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. Give us a shout. I'll give you a call back, immediately, and whatever we can do, we'd love to chat.
Well, awesome. And this was absolutely, like, every time I talk to you, Tanner, I learn something new. This has been so fun. And as you were talking about We Need Wolves, and then you're talking about teamwork and servant leadership, I was thinking, he's creating wolf packs, so that's really cool. So this was really fun for me. I always have fun with my guests, but it's been a real pleasure with you here. We've got, by the way, Aaron Gabriel is on here, said great discussion. Aaron is with Parazero, our month sponsor. I'm almost I'm sad to see the end of Movers and Shakers month because, like I said, it's just been so incredible between Parazero and Delta Drone supporting us, and of course, you, Tanner, sponsoring this episode as part of Blue Nose Aerial Imaging. Really, thank you for that. Thanks for all you're doing because what you're doing and this model you've created is going to change the industry. And so, the other thing I wanted to say before we sign out, real quick, two things. Number one, next month we're kicking off Defenders Month. So we're going to focus on our first responders and our military. It's going to be, both Tanner and I share that heritage, and it's a labor of love this coming month, really talking about all the way drones are supporting all of those efforts, and who better to kick it off with than AIRT and Chris Todd and Charles Werner from Drone Responders. So they're going to be on next Wednesday, same time, same place, but also tomorrow on Clubhouse. Join us, Drone Law Connections, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. They're going to join us there as a little bit of a prequel. So hope to see you all there. We're a little bit over, but that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for joining in. Thanks again, Parazero, Delta Drone, for a spectacular month. All of our guest speakers, go back and watch those videos and rewatch this one, because if you missed any of it, you got to hear the whole thing. Thanks so much, Tanner.
Thanks,
Out here.
Tyler.
Have a great week, everybody.